Whom?
I agree.
Okay. From whom? Americans.
Yeah. I thought, okay.
Yep. All right. So we're all set. Okay. That's perfect. You can never please everyone, but
I will
right.
text my co-authors to check that they're joining.
Francesco, before I forget, could you please, after the webinar, send us the slides?
Of course, yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
We can add your co-authors at any point, so also only after your presentation's finished during the Q&A.
Andrew,
I mean, I want them to answer what I talk.
Aha, yeah, okay, understand.
Oh yeah, that's a good idea. We can have Francesco's co-author ask clarifications. I mean, answer the clarification questions.
Yeah, that's what I've seen people doing in other webinars.
That's perfect. So you are a Bocconi grad.
Yeah.
Who did you graduate with?
With Tommaso Monacelli.
I see.
Yeah.
I see, I see. I think they put Giavazzi in the government now, no?
I mean, it's not official in the government. It's one of these experts that Draghi, of course, is referring to.
Right.
But yeah, we have a lot of Bocconi people now in the government. Also, 3 or 4 ministers are Bocconi faculty. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, it's supposed to be a technocratic government, no?
Yeah.
Let's see. I collaborated with a think tank here on a project whereby they suggested, you know, how Italy could use the money for the green recovery. And, you know, during the preliminary discussions, they were telling me that Italy has never managed to use this money because they didn't have a plan in place. So they didn't know how they were going to use it, where they're going to invest.
Yeah.
So this was a great opportunity, you know, to lay some structure on how this money was going to be used. And this was really, you know, surprising for me because compared to New York, I'm not even going to talk about Greece, which is where I originally am, but compared to New York, people here are much more environment conscious than New York. I mean, I don't know if, Emanuele, do you agree that Italians, and certainly in Milan, are much more conscious about the environment? And so I thought it was interesting that, you know, the government didn't have anything in place on how to use funds like that.
Maybe we are not that environment friendly after all. Not sure.
I go to New York.
Me neither. I mean, US, maybe, I don't know, but if I compare it to the German culture, definitely we are less environmental friendly.
But in New York, we're still discussing, you know, whether climate change is real. So, I mean, and it's not only people, you know, who are not particularly educated or who are, you know, Trump supporters. It's, you know, these people are, you know, everywhere, and they argue that might not be the case. So there's barely any recycling. There is, so everything is relative, I guess.
Yeah.
So I'll promote both Lucas and Florian, okay? Once we start the webinar, all right.
Thanks.
And I'll disappear now. Good luck for your talk, and see you later.
Bye, Adrian. Thank you.
So, Francesco, just a couple of things. You will speak for about 40 minutes. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's what I calibrated.
Okay, great. And just to be sure, your co-authors, the pronunciation is Matthias Kaldorf, Lukas Ratschke, and Florian Wicknig.
I would say Wicknig, but yeah.
Wicknig.
I mean, I'm no more German than you, so.
Well, yeah, I mean, I spent 4 years living in Vienna, and this is my level of German. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, gentlemen, I'm going to turn off my video and I'll mute myself, and we're going to start the webinar. So you are live, basically.
Anastasia, but
yeah.
you said that you wanted to wait.
Yes, but we usually wait with you on the screen, because otherwise they keep on getting the message, you know, the host hasn't started the whole thing. So we don't want to give them the impression we're late. It's just that we're waiting for them.
Okay, but so we should just stay silent for 1 minute?
Yeah, if you start seeing people coming on, you know, in droves, then go ahead and start.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Good luck. Thanks again, Francesco.
Thanks. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. We will start in 1 minute. We will wait for people to come and we will start. We are just waiting for attendees to come into the room. We will start very shortly. Right, so I think we can start. So welcome everyone to this new event of the webinar series organized by the E-Access Forum on Climate Change, Macroeconomics and Finance. The aim of the forum is to aggregate researchers and policymakers working on topics at the intersection of these fields. In addition to the webinar series, the forum is also on Slack, and you can find working papers, news and conference information there. My name is Emanuele Campiglio. I'm an associate professor at the University of Bologna, and I will be the chair of this event. Tonight's speaker is Francesco Giovanardi. Francesco is assistant professor at the Center for Macroeconomic Research at the University of Cologne. He has a PhD from Bocconi University in Milano. His research lies mostly in the areas of monetary economics, quantitative macroeconomics, with a particular interest in the role of beliefs, financial frictions, heterogeneity, and their interaction to for aggregate fluctuations. The paper he will be presenting today is entitled The Preferential Treatment of Green Bonds, and is co-authored with Matthias Kaldorf, Lukas Ratschke, and Florian Wicknig. They all should be present here, and they will be able to intervene either live or on the chat. So the event will be structured as follows. Francesco will speak for 40 minutes. Please feel free to pose your questions in the chat, in the Q&A section during his presentation. If these are immediate clarification questions, I will briefly interrupt Francesco for him to address them. I will instead postpone all deeper questions to the Q&A section after after Francesco's presentation. At that point, I will invite you to open your microphone. Please raise your hand so we can unmute you in the system, and you can ask your questions directly to the speaker. I can also do it for you if you prefer. If that's the case, just please signal so in the text of the question. Before leaving the floor to Francesco, please let me launch the usual poll of e-access webinars. You can see it. It should appear now on your screen. You will see two questions, and we will like to ask you to please read them and let us know what your opinion is. The first one has to do with the topic of today's seminar, the idea of giving preferential treatment to green bonds in a central bank's collateral framework. So we're asking you whether before listening to Francesco's presentation, this seems like a good idea to you or not. And then Francesco's methodological approach is a new Keynesian DSG model. And we would like to ask you before the presentation what your feeling is, if any, about this methodological approach. So please take a few seconds to answer the question. Okay, I think we should wrap it up and see the results. So let's see. It seems that 60% of the audience likes the idea, with the 34% that is not entirely sure, and a minority, but still 7% that is not so keen. What about the methodological approaches? 34% thinks that this is the best approach available at the moment. People are anyway happy for researchers to use them, although there might be some other methods available. Okay, thank you very much for this. This was really interesting. So this is it from me. I will now leave the floor to Francesco Giovanardi. And thank you again, Francesco, for being with us.
Thank you, Emanuele. Can you hear me fine? Yes, I should have unmuted me. Okay, let me put the slides full screen and see. Okay. Okay, thank you, Emanuele, and thank you to e-access for inviting me to discuss about our paper about the preferential treatment of green bonds. As Emanuele said, this is joint work with Matthias, Lucas, and Florian, and we all are at the CMR at University of Cologne. Okay, let me start. I don't think I have to convince you too much that environmental concerns and climate change have become a central policy dimension nowadays in the economic debate. Okay, and I just wanted to give you the economist's point of view of this trade-off of climate change, which is basically trying to reduce the negative effects of pollution of climate change without affecting too much economic activity. Okay, we know that climate change is generated by economic activity mainly. We want to mitigate the negative effects without jeopardizing economic activity. Okay, and if you are a public economist, this is a textbook example of a negative externality, and we want to use a Pigouvian tax to try to, again, kill these negative externalities and polluting activities. Okay. However, it's, I guess, under the eyes of everybody that this type of policy has not been entirely successful, even though they were implemented in the past. But we see that climate change continues to be a primarily an important concern. Okay, and so we know that here there are political economic arguments that mainly tell you that probably governments are not so much committed to implement this type of policies. Okay, and you also discussed this in the previous webinar, so I shouldn't focus too much on this. And so for these reasons, there has been a call for action from independent institutions like central bank then maybe they are better suited in order to address this kind of environmental concerns, given their independence from the political cycle and from the political arguments, political economy arguments that I was discussing before. Okay, and we know that DCB is currently under the strategy review, and they are mentioning basically that they are exploring whether the central bank can or should do something about climate change. Okay, but let me start from what was said in the previous e-access webinar, and for whoever did not attend to the webinar, I strongly suggest to catch up with your live recording, because it was really interesting. And e-access had 3 central bankers from the ECB, from the Bundesbank, and from the Bank of Spain. And I want to tell you what I think is relevant for me and for my paper. Okay, so Catherine Assenmacher from the ECB said that basically the primary objective for the ECB is price stability. Okay, and so environmental concerns shouldn't be the primary objective, but if the ECB could pursue this objective of climate change without affecting the primary objective, which is price stability, then the ECB would have a legal possibility of pursuing also other objectives of the European Union. Okay, and one objective of the European Union is trying to mitigate climate change. And of course, what she said, I think it's really clever and it's super true. Governments have definitely more effective instrument to fight climate change than monetary policy. Okay, so, and also if we see that governments do not act, this is not a justification for the central bank to act. Okay, so we should really keep in mind that monetary policy and central banks are not designed to be so effective in fighting climate change. Okay, still, central bank can play a role, and as Emanuele Monk said, more analytical work is needed to understand the role of central banks in fighting climate change. Okay, and that's why we felt the need for writing this paper. Okay, we try to inform the policy debate with this more analytical work. Okay, and basically the channel through which our model is going to be useful for climate change, our model says that monetary policy can be useful for climate change, is that there is evidence that asset prices do not incorporate climate risk, okay? And so our preferential treatment of green bonds will force the market to internalize, basically to incorporate this kind of climate risk. Okay, and so basically this is a list of the proposals that have been proposed in the literature, both in the economic literature and in the policy debate. You had previous webinars exploring the Grove and Schumacher proposal that was calling for tilting the balance sheet of the central banks towards greener bonds, okay? And this is basically the green QE of Ferrari and Spilandi that were here, I would say, a couple of weeks ago or more. While now we are exploring the preferential treatment for green bonds, okay, which is a proposal by Brunner Meyer and Landau that basically says that you can try to affect the price of green bonds, and so the financing conditions of green entrepreneurs, by basically treating green bonds preferentially when you implement monetary policy. Okay, I will be a bit more clear in the model, but basically the idea is that when you treat green bonds preferentially, this will have a collateral premium inside the bond price, okay? And so by choosing this collateral premium, you can basically affect the financing conditions of green entrepreneurs. Okay, and of course, the literature is aware about this potential downside of this policy, which is basically noticing that if you relax financing conditions of green entrepreneurs or of whoever entrepreneur, basically you are incentivizing more risky behavior, okay? And so a side effect of this policy is that actually you are going to increase the default probability of these green entrepreneurs or green sector, and this can be, of course, not so beneficial as you would imagine. Okay, so the aim of this paper is trying to evaluate in a properly calibrated model for the euro area this kind of interplay between the positive effects of this preferential treatment with the negative effects of affecting the financial stability, basically, of the economy. Okay, and so basically I anticipated a bit what we are doing here. And first I'm going to show you very quickly, given that I don't have so much time, what we do also kind of an empirical motivation, where basically we see that after ECB environmental policy announcements that we identify as ECB announcing basically that they are going to evaluate and they're going to implement some kind of environmental policy. Okay, we find that green bonds are significantly affected by these announcements. And we take this as evidence for, okay, financial markets and people believe that central bank can play a role in fighting climate change. And then we go to the model, okay, and we try to answer the question that I was telling you before. And basically what we find is that preferential treatment indeed increase the green bond share, so it manages to relax financing condition of green entrepreneurs, but this increase only partially transmits to green capital share, meaning that there is kind of the adverse effect I was telling you about. Okay, and quantitatively, we see that the optimal collateral policy implies a 0.6% increase in the green bond share and a 0.25% increase in the green investment share. Okay, so the pass-through from the green bond share to the green investment share is basically 150%. Okay, so let me skip this. We are basically contributing to the three strands of the literature. Okay, the main one is the DSG models and environmental concerns, and you had again some papers already discussed in this webinar. So let me go, unless there is any clarification question, but I guess everything is fine. Let me go to the empirical evidence that we show. Okay, so here we want to see whether financial markets believe that central banks are able in affecting the green bond market, in affecting the financing conditions of green entrepreneurs. Okay, so what we did is we went through all the speeches or press releases about ECB board members or from the ECB president, and we looked which kind of speeches were explicitly announcing that the ECB is going to do something about climate change. Let me show you just the main one, which is the president's speech, Christine Lagarde's speech of basically last year. At some point, she says, if you have to evaluate the implications for our management of risk, of climate risk, in particular through our collateral framework. Okay, so these are announcements where you see that the ECB is willing to take some action in fighting climate change. And so what we did is, around these dates, okay, we examined the reaction of green bond yields relatively to a synthetic treatment, synthetic control group, which is some conventional bonds that are comparable to our green bonds. Okay, what we see that these treated green bonds yields significantly decreases after this ECB policy announcement. Basically, we have a data set of 1,400 green bonds. Okay, we do this nearest neighbor matching where we construct, when we try to look at all the other bonds that we have in our data set, which are not green, which is basically the appropriate comparison. Okay, so it's basically the bond that is the smallest distance when we define the distance as this score encompassing credit risk, liquidity risk, size, and cash flow profile. So basically, we take two bonds that mainly differ only because one is green and the other is conventional. And we look at the response of these two bonds around the announcement dates that we identify. Okay, and this gives us, for every treatment date, around 80 to 90 match bond pairs. This is the yield reaction for every speech that we identify, for every announcement that we identify. You can take an average and you get this plot. Okay, so we see 0 is the announcement date. We look at the evolution of the again, the difference between the green bond and our conventional matched bond. Okay, we see no difference before. And after the announcement date, we see this green bond yield difference that is decreasing, meaning that the price of the green bond is increasing with respect to the price of the conventional bond. Okay, and the effect is significantly after 6 trading days of 2 basis points. Again, we take this as evidence that central banks may play some role by affecting the green bond market through its policy instrument. Okay, and now I'm going to show you a model where we particularly investigate the preferential treatment of green bonds. Okay, and so this model will be the standard New Keynesian model enriched in 3 main dimensions. The first one, of course, we need a conventional sector and a green sector. Okay, so we have 2 types of entrepreneurs. One we call it conventional, one we call it green. And the only dimension on which they differ is that the conventional sector, the conventional entrepreneur, generates a negative externality, okay, which is pollution, while the green entrepreneur does not generate pollution. The second dimension that we enrich the New Keynesian model on is default risk. Okay, of course, we need a bond price that is pricing default risk, okay, and to see whether our policy instrument will affect the default risk of the 2 different sectors. Okay, so here we will use a standard BGG financial friction, okay, where entrepreneurs will default on their bonds if revenues from production will fall below repayment obligation. I will show you more in detail. And the third one, it's a banking sector, okay? So there is a bank that is collecting deposits from households and lending to entrepreneurs in the form of bonds, okay? And in order to give a role to the collateral policy, we need to use basically the framework studied by Kaldorf and Wicknick, which are 2 authors of this paper, where they basically assume that banking activity is costly, okay? And so the ECB can affect this cost, can affect this trade-off basically between collateral supply and riskiness of bank assets through changing the collateral policy parameter that I will show you in a couple of slides. Okay, so this is the model in a nutshell, okay? It's basically the New Keynesian model. If you see my mouse, this is the New Keynesian model, okay? And basically we had banks and we had 2 different entrepreneurs. There is a question?
I don't think so, no.
Okay, I heard someone speaking. Okay, so the household problem, I don't want to lose time on this. It's the standard New Keynesian or RBC household problem. Okay, you have an household that is maximizing lifetime utility by choosing consumption, labor supply, and saving, here in terms of nominal deposits, subject to a nominal budget constraint, subject to all the constraints on consumption and dividends, subject to a transversality condition. Okay, so this maximization problem gives you the standard intertemporal Euler equation and the standard intratemporal labor supply optimal condition. Okay, nothing special here. The banking sector instead is something new. Okay, so we have a mass 1 continuum of perfectly competitive banks. Okay, they supply deposits to household and they invest in corporate bonds. Okay, here we need to differentiate among 2 periods. So we assume that there are 2 subperiods, and in subperiod 1, banks are participating in markets for bonds and deposits. Okay, so this is the standard part of the banking problem. The non-standard part of the banking problem is that in the second subperiod, okay, so at the night of the day, basically, banks are hit by a liquidity shock. Okay, and to settle this liquidity shock, you need to settle this with the central bank via collateralized borrowing. Okay, so basically, we are trying to model the interbank market. Okay, there is no interbank market here. The only institution you can borrow from is to settle this liquidity deficit is the central bank. So you go to the central bank, you say, I need this liquidity overnight. Okay, you please lend me the liquidity and I give you the collateral. Okay, this is the way standard collateralized market from the central bank to the financial sector. Okay, and so the modeling is similar to basically Cordian-Woodford, and we have to model this bank cost. Okay, and so here we're assuming that this banking cost or this liquidity deficit, which is a shock, okay, omega, it's in principle a random variable, okay, this liquidity shock is positively affected by this F bar, which is the aggregate default rates from corporate bonds. Basically, this is a measure of the riskiness of the assets in the portfolio of the bank, okay? So the more risky the assets that you hold, the more the cost that you're paying overnight, okay? And it's negatively affected by B bar, where B bar is the amount of available collateral. Okay, so banks will have in their portfolio bonds for the conventional entrepreneurs, bonds for the green entrepreneurs. This is the value, and you multiply by phi C and phi G, okay, which are the collateral policy parameter of the central bank. Okay, so basically, by increasing the collateral policy parameter, the central bank is able to increase the amount of available collateral, and so this is going to decrease the cost that the banking activity is paying every period. Okay, so this is a reduced form way to capture both the fact that the banking system is intermediating a risky asset. Okay, so the more risky the assets, the more banking activity is costly. Okay, and also a reduced form way to capture the benefits of having collateral in your portfolio. Okay, so the more collateral that you have in your portfolio, the less the cost that you're paying for conducting banking, for implementing banking activity. Okay, so this is more or less the reduced form way through which we capture basically the relevance of this policy instrument. So the maximization, the problem of the bank is maximizing current profits, okay, subject to basically a budget constraint that tells you, sorry, I don't see, I'm covered by the gallery. Basically, in every period, you raise deposits, you finance conventional entrepreneur, you finance the green entrepreneur, and you pay this banking activity cost. Okay, so you try to maximize this quantity subject to this constraint, which is similar to Cordian-Woodford, where basically it's telling you that the bank in every period raises the amount of deposits up to the point that on average they're able to repay tomorrow this deposit through the bonds payoffs. Okay, so the bond payoff is uncertain. You don't know whether tomorrow the entrepreneur is going to default or not. You have an expected return. Okay, so you compute this expected return for the conventional entrepreneur and for the green entrepreneur, and you basically will supply deposits up to that amount. You take first order condition and you get to the optimal bond price condition. Okay, so basically, if you forget for a minute about the collateral policy parameter, you get that the price of a bond is basically the present discount value of the expected return. Okay, so standard optimal bond price. Now, if you add this policy parameter, we're basically creating a wedge in this first order condition. Okay, and this wedge is telling you that if you increase fee, okay, you basically decrease the price of the bond. Okay, so the liquidity shock drives a wedge between the marginal cost of a bond purchase, which is the left-hand side, and the expected payoff. Okay, so sorry, omega b is a negative value because the cost is convex. So if you increase the collateral policy parameter, basically you increase this, decrease this because it's negative, so you increase the price of the bond. Okay, so the higher the policy parameter, the higher the price of the bond, so the more favorable our financing condition for the entrepreneurs. Okay, and as I told you, we have two entrepreneurs, conventional and green. Okay, the conventional entrepreneurs generate pollution, And now we're assuming that entrepreneurs are risk neutral and have a discount factor beta tilde, which is lower than the discount factor of the household. Okay, so entrepreneurs are more impatient than households, and this will create a motive for borrowing for the entrepreneurs. I told you the financial friction is modeled as BGG, so entrepreneurs are subject in every period to an uninsurable idiosyncratic shock, which is following a log normal distribution. So in every period, your production function, it depends on the holding of your capital. Tau, it's conventional or green. So for every entrepreneur, is holding some capital, and it can produce the intermediate good that tau, so Z conventional or Z green, subject to some uninsurable idiosyncratic shock. Okay, and then we add a financial shock, a risk shock, a la Cristiano Montolostagno, by assuming that this volatility of the log normal shock is time varying. So what is the maximization problem of the entrepreneur? Basically, you want to maximize consumption, okay? It's lifetime utility, but utility is linear, so you want to maximize lifetime consumption, okay? Subject to the budget constraint, which is telling you that the left-hand side here, it's your expenditures as an entrepreneur, so you spend money for consuming, for investing in new capital, and for repaying the debt that you had yesterday. Okay, so BT is the debt that you raised yesterday, and F of M bar, it's the probability of default. So with probability 1 minus F of M bar, you don't default and you have to repay your debt obligation, okay? And the resources that you have, it's the capital undepreciated that you had from yesterday, okay? The amount of money if you don't default, sorry, the amount of resources if you don't default that you get from production, okay, and from selling the good to the intermediate firm, okay, plus the resources that you're able to raise as external financing, that is basically the bond that you issue in period T. Okay, so the first condition here, it's a bit complicated. So let me show you the first condition for a simplified model to make you understand what is the mechanism that is at work here. Okay, so consider full depreciation, a real model, so no nominal, no price rigidity, nothing special, only full depreciation and no nominal rigidities. Okay, basically the first condition can be summarized as in BGG in terms of M bar, okay, which is basically, sorry, I forgot to tell you, which is basically the default threshold. So whenever your shock is higher than M bar, you're not going to default. Whenever your shock is lower than M bar, you're going to default. And so basically your output, your production is taken from the bank. Okay, so if you default as an entrepreneur, the bank will take your output. Okay, so the risk choice M bar becomes basically the leverage, okay? B over K is the amount of debt that you have over the capital that you own, okay? So it's the leverage. Okay, so your leverage choice is basically determined by relative impatience. Okay, forget about phi tau for a second. Okay, beta minus beta tilde over beta is relative impatience, and the right-hand side is basically default risk, marginal default risk. Okay, so H of M bar is the hazard rate. Okay, so how much how much marginally you're going to default. Okay, how much more marginally you're going to default. Okay, so the left-hand side is the benefit, the motive for borrowing, which is impatience. The right-hand side is the cost of borrowing, which is marginal default risk. If you default tomorrow, you're not going to consume, you're going to consume less because your output is seized by the bank. Okay, so with no collateral premium, the risk choice is trivially determined by this relative impatience against the marginal default risk. When you introduce collateral premium, okay, when you introduce a collateral policy, a positive collateral policy, you are creating a wedge in this first order condition. Okay, so again, when phi tau for both the conventional or the green entrepreneur is increasing, what's happening is that the left-hand side is increasing, okay? And so also the right-hand side has to increase in equilibrium, which given the log normal assumption of our model, given the monotonic hazard rate, okay, this implies that you have to increase also your leverage choice. Okay, so this is the negative effect I was telling you. If you increase the amount of available collateral by increasing this policy parameter, you're basically generating more leverage entrepreneurs. Also, you can show here, it's just a graph to show you the intuition, you can show that not only M-bar leverage is increasing, but also your amount of borrowing is increasing. This is kind of a Laffer curve, okay? So the more bond, the more you borrow as an entrepreneur, okay, this QB times B, it's the amount of money that you get today given the level of borrowing that you pick, okay? So at some point, your level of borrowing is so high that for sure, or with a high probability, you're going to default, so the price of your bond will start to go down as you increase B. Okay, so this is the negative effect on the bond price through higher leverage. Okay, still you can show that basically increasing the policy parameter, so creating a collateral premium from a zero policy, from a zero collateral policy, okay, basically this shifts both this Laffer curve and the optimal condition of the entrepreneur so that the level of borrowing in equilibrium after this increase in the policy parameter is going to increase. Okay, so probably you're lost. What do we have? If you affect the risk-taking behavior of entrepreneur by affecting M-bar, by increasing your phi tau as a central bank, what you're generating is an increase in the leverage in M-bar and simultaneously an increase in the level of borrowing of entrepreneurs. Okay. Then here is the crucial part, is the crucial transmission mechanism. Now, this is going to be effective only if also, so if you preferentially treat the green entrepreneur against the conventional entrepreneur. So if you increase the phi G, the fee for the green entrepreneur and not the one for the conventional entrepreneur, you're basically going to increase the leverage of the green entrepreneur. You're going to increase the level of borrowing of the green entrepreneur. And whether this policy is effective or not depends on how much the level of capital of the green entrepreneur is going to go up. Okay, so it depends on how much of the total capital of the economy is attributed to the green entrepreneur instead of to the conventional entrepreneur. Okay, so if you're able to also increase this K-bar, basically the green capital share, which is, again, the share between the level of capital for the green entrepreneur and the level of capital for the conventional entrepreneur, is going also to increase. Okay, so the extent of this pass-through of this policy depends on how much K is going to react. Okay, and this, of course, depends on the parameterization of the model, and through a decent calibration of the model, we are trying to capture how important this is. But still, now I show you that the level of increase in the capital, okay, it's bounded from above to the increase of the B, okay? Because if M is increasing and also B is increasing, K can increase, but only up to the point where this ratio is still increasing, okay? So only up to the point, to the absolute point where B is also increasing. Okay, so now we want to understand whether this increase in M-bar is beneficial in terms of welfare, so in terms of decreasing the negative externality, by also an increase in K. The rest of the model, it's quite standard. We have these two entrepreneurs producing two intermediate goods, the green and the conventional goods. There is a wholesale firm that is basically producing another intermediate good, which is a bundle of the green and the conventional one, which is a Cobb-Douglas. Okay, and then we are going to have a final goods firm, a continuum of monopolistic final good producers that produce the final differentiated good, yi, okay, according to this production function. Okay, so they're going to buy the intermediate good from the wholesale firm. They're going to hire labor from the household. They have a technology which is a TFP, which is time varying. And okay, crucially, there is this 1 minus pollution function. Okay, so this is the pollution of the economy. And this is the negative externality through which pollution is affecting negatively the economic activity. Okay, so here we're following the literature like Golosov and co-authors 2014, where basically pollution is generated by only the good produced by the conventional entrepreneur. Okay, and here is what I was telling you before, only the conventional entrepreneur is producing pollution. And so this is mapped through this pollution function that is negatively affecting total output in the economy. All right, of course, these monopolistic final good producer are subject also to quadratic adjustment cost to get the standard New Keynesian Phillips curve with real marginal cost time varying, okay, and with inflation affecting, with inflation being forward-looking. Okay, so this is the standard New Keynesian Phillips curve through which monetary policy is basically going to affect the economy through the conventional nominal interest rate. Okay, so we will have a central bank that is setting the nominal interest rate according to a standard Taylor rule reacting to only inflation, okay? And then we also have the central bank that has to decide the policy parameters, phi tau and phi g. So how much the amount of collateral that is beneficial for the banks, for the conventional bond and for the green bond, okay? And so we take a baseline carry inflation, which is symmetric, okay? So we assume that we start from an economy where there is no preferential treatment, where there is the same collateral parameter both for the conventional sector and for the green sector. And then we're going to play around a bit with the asymmetry of this policy. So I have 6 minutes, more or less.
Yes, that sounds about right.
Thank you. So the calibration, it's standard on the already New Keynesian dimensions, so I don't want to lose time on that. I just want to tell you how we try to calibrate to make, again, we want to answer how much capital, how much green capital is responding to this policy parameter. So we want to be realistic in modeling these financial markets between the bank and entrepreneur. Okay, and so basically we calibrate the banking cost function to match some feature of the data. We calibrate we try to get right the amount of leverage in the euro area and the spread levels in the euro area. And of course, we try to calibrate basically this parameter gamma p to get the current estimate from Mueller 2019 that so how much pollution is affecting total output, okay? And we have to match the size of the green factor of the green sector, which is basically this nu, okay? So this nu, given the Cobb-Douglas assumption, is giving you the relative size of the green sector against the conventional sector. Okay, and so these are basically the moments that we are trying to target. Let me skip it. We do a good job. Okay, so first, welfare criterion is going to be household lifetime utility. So we assume that the welfare criterion is not affected by welfare as entrepreneurs. And the welfare gains I'm going to show you are going to be about, to give you a sense of how important this is, are going to be about 23% of the welfare gains that you will get in this model by removing business cycles. Okay, so typically in this literature, in the New Keynesian literature, when we want to evaluate the welfare gains of policies, we compute this consumption equivalent, okay? And so the amount of consumption equivalent that we get is 23% of the consumption equivalent in a policy, so in an economy where there are, there are no aggregate fluctuations. Okay, so let me tell you something important before I go to the main result. So since this banking activity cost function is quite new, we don't have much to calibrate. Okay, so we did this experiment. So we calibrate the banking cost activity so that basically our baseline calibration is the optimal one. Okay, so we are assuming that the collateral policy parameter that we observe in the euro area is already optimal from the point of view of asymmetric treatment, so without considering the externality. And so this is why this is our baseline calibration of 0.23 collateral parameter, and this is why this is optimal for the symmetric treatment, because we calibrate the banking cost function to get this. Okay, and then we are going to explore first what happens when we change this symmetric collateral policy. Okay, so when we move this symmetric collateral policy, so both for the conventional sector and for the green sector. Okay, and you see that basically there are no effects on inflation as a time series mean. So we are computing the long run mean of these variables in the difference between the long run mean in the new economy with a different policy parameter with the baseline calibration. Okay, so now preferential treatment. We want to see what happens when we differentiate between the collateral parameter of the conventional entrepreneur and the collateral parameter of the green entrepreneur. Okay, so first we do this naive thing of keeping phi C at the baseline, so 0.23, and just increasing phi G. Okay, so again, by doing this, you are increasing the collateral value for green bonds. Okay, so you're increasing the green bond price by affecting this collateral premium, and so you're going to ease financing condition of green entrepreneurs. Okay, what do we see? Basically, this is our middle column. This is the baseline. This is the experiment that I was telling you. What you see is the green premium, the green collateral premium, sorry, here you should have collateral premium. So the difference between a bond price which is collateralizable and a bond price which is not collateralizable, it's going to increase, okay, from -7 basis points, which is basically an estimate of the collateral premium that from Pellitzon, from a paper from Pellitzon, okay? And of course, if you treat green entrepreneurs preferentially, this collateral premium is going to increase for green entrepreneur and to decrease a bit for conventional entrepreneur. What are the real effects of this policy? Again, the green bond share is going to increase by 0.37%, okay? And the green capital share is going to increase, but by a lower amount, okay? Again, because the increase in capital for the green entrepreneur is bounded above from decrease in the bond level of the green entrepreneur. Okay, so to give you an idea, the first best of this economy, so the green bond share that a Ramsey planner would choose in this economy, so a Ramsey planner that internalizes the negative externality, which is in this economy, is more or less 24%. Okay, so again, it's what I told you at the beginning. Of course, there are more effective instruments from fiscal policy, sorry, okay, which would be, again, in this model, a Pigouvian tax on carbon production would be able to get to the first best, but still this policy of the central bank is able to at least give a push in the right direction, okay? Despite this negative effect that not all the increase in the green bond share is transmitted to an increase in the green capital share. Okay, then the second experiment, okay, it's we also vary now phi G, okay? So we increase phi G, we increase the collateral policy parameter for the green entrepreneur, but at the same time, we decrease the one for the conventional entrepreneur, okay? And this is why, this is because we see that changing that the policy parameter is going to give you a huge increase in default cost, okay? Because again, green entrepreneurs are going to choose is going to be more leverage than before, okay? And so we want to counteract this by decreasing the leverage of conventional entrepreneur. Okay, and in this case, which is a third column, okay, you see that you can do a bit better. Okay, so now the green bond share, it's increasing by 0.6%, and the green capital share is going to go to 0.26% more. Okay, so this is the representation of your welfare. The blue is the baseline. The purple is the preferential treatment, the first experiment that I told you. And the red one is a bit higher than the purple one, is the global optimum, okay? Again, here we are both increasing the policy parameter for the central bank and decreasing the policy parameter for the green entrepreneur and decreasing the policy parameter for the conventional entrepreneur. Now, before concluding, give me 5 seconds. I think this is important. Okay, so if you use this instrument as a central bank, so the green collateral parameter, you are going to, sorry, the timer. Basically, the effect on inflation volatility, which is the inflation cost depicted here, is basically negligible. This is not moving. Okay, so this is telling us that this policy has no effect on the primary objective of central bank, which is keeping low inflation volatility. Okay, and so then let me conclude with I guess we informed the policy debate around the effectiveness of central bank in addressing environmental concern through one of the instruments proposed by the academic debate, which is the collateral framework through which monetary policy is interacting with the financial markets. Okay, and what I show you is that, as we know, this is not a great instrument. Okay, there are more effective instruments from fiscal policy, but at least here the central bank is able to affect the green bond share in the right direction. And importantly, this optimal policy does not seem to have an effect on price stability. So this should be feasible in legal terms for DCB, for example. And thank you for your attention. And I leave the floor to Emanuele.
Thank you, Francesco. That was very, very interesting. So I would suggest now anyone in the audience who wants to ask a question to Francesco and co-authors to raise their hand so that we can see them and they can speak up, or just put the question in the Q&A section and I will ask it for you. Let me start. We got the questions. Francesco, let me just forward you the similar questions to the one that we asked our speakers, our audience at the beginning. That is, well, I guess that having written a paper on the idea, I can assume that you think it's a good idea, as you said. There might be others that might be more relevant, but this is certainly something that could help. Do you think it's a feasible idea? You mentioned it at the very end that this might be feasible. So I was wondering whether you could elaborate on that. And the second question was about the new Keynesian modeling approach, whether you think this is the more appropriate way to interpret this, to address this question. Before I give you the floor, let me just give the word to Rick van der Ploeg so that we can at least pool a few questions. Yeah. Rick, I think you can talk, right? You're muted.
I can talk. I hope I haven't got a video on because I'm in a bath.
No, you're doing fine.
Okay, good. So this was a very nice paper, and I really liked it very much. There are other ways of dealing with collaterals and doing it like that. This was a nice study. But the first order question which comes to mind is, what happens if you just internalize the carbon tax? So the pollution externality by having a carbon tax. So I would have liked to have seen a trade-off that the less able you are implement a carbon tax, whether there is a bigger reason to have collateral policies. So now you really look at a third best or a second best optimal policy where you cannot internalize carbon externalities at all in aggregate production. But the question is, of course, what would it like if you did? Because if you did internalize it, there would, of course, be price effects. I mean, that's indeed what Madame Lagarde is interested in, because you push up carbon prices, so you push up consumer prices, then the central bank will have to react. So you've kind of shoved that all under the table, and presumably the reason is that you think it's not realistic that countries are doing carbon pricing, but of course, maybe they will, and maybe what we need is a combination that carbon pricing itself might push people into a default region, which then may require, particularly if there's transition risk, maybe a reason for asking for special green collateral policies. But in your model, there's no real reason why you would want to have a green collateral policy except for some third best alternative for a carbon tax. But I'm just wondering, so I wonder what you think of that.
Okay.
Francesco, do you want to have another one, or you can start answering these?
I mean,
questions?
I can start. There is already enough meat in the plate.
Okay.
So about the feasibility, I think I'm quite convinced that this instrument is feasible. First, because it's already there. Okay, so this part of the conventional monetary policy of the central bank, it's really the core of how the central bank is interacting with financial markets. Okay, so feasible. So it's an instrument that is there. Okay, the problem is, as I was telling you at the beginning, the point is climate change and climate concerns are not the primary objective of the ECB. We know that. Okay, but I guess it's important to understand that if you show that this instrument is not affecting price stability, okay, you can claim that you're going to use it to try to get some secondary objective for the European Union. Okay, and again, one of the objectives of the European Union is trying to fight climate change. Okay, trying to be more green. Okay, and so I guess, of course, this paper is not enough to show, but this paper is suggesting that this kind of instrument would definitely not affect the mandate of the ECB in terms of price stability. So, of course, the particular thing about this instrument, and I didn't discuss this today, but we discussed a bit in the paper, is that, of course, this instrument is making monetary policy not neutral in the long run. Okay, so by changing this collateral parameter, you're affecting the steady state level of bonds, of capital. So you have to basically accept the fact that the central bank is not neutral in the long run. Which, again, from the point of view of this model, already the central bank is not neutral in the long run. Since there is this collateral policy, by changing this collateral policy parameter, you're changing the level of debt and of capital that is available in the economy. And so again, I think this is feasible because it's there, it's already operating. The only part is convincing, I would say, the policy, the political actors that this, if the ECB is going to use this instrument, is not going to damage itself in terms of the primary mandate of price stability. Then about the new Keynesian modeling approach, I mean, we know that new Keynesian models are the most used economic modeling framework in central banks and in academia to understand monetary policy and its effect on the real economy. And so if you want to study the interaction of climate change and monetary policy, I would say the best method, the best model that is available is monetary policy. Of course, you could be a bit more serious also in this paper, but in other papers in the literature, in trying to modeling to simultaneously the long run and the short run. Okay, so we know that climate change is a long run phenomenon. We know that the new Keynesian model is about short run fluctuations. So I guess there is room to improve on also because it's already there. There are models of endogenous growth, of business cycle interacting with the with lower frequencies. So we could try to do better at that, definitely. But I would say the New Keynesian model is the one we use for studying optimal monetary policy, So I don't see how we can depart from the New Keynesian model when we want to study the interaction between monetary policy and climate change. And then about the carbon tax, I mean, of course, I mean, in this model, again, so you can put a carbon tax and everyone is happy. You reach the first best, which again, it's we are able to compute it, and we show that basically this is so you're able to close a gap with the first best in terms of a 30%, more or less. So of course, a carbon tax would be desirable, okay, but as you said, and as I said in the introduction, you can think this as an unrealistic instrument because governments seem not to be so committed into these carbon taxes. Okay, and again, we understand the political economy arguments why they don't want to do so, and so I think it makes sense to first understand what the central bank can do if the government is not doing anything. And then I agree. So the progression of this literature should definitely study more seriously the interaction between monetary policy and fiscal policy in fighting climate change. So yeah, for example, we could show that the level of the carbon tax that the government would need in order to implement the first best could be lower if there was also a central bank using our preferential treatment of collateral. So definitely, I think the interaction is going to be super interesting, and it's something that we're going to do at some point. But for now, I cannot answer. I can only give you the naive answer that, of course, the carbon tax is able to achieve the first best. So, of course, the carbon tax is a dominant instrument with respect to ours.
Right. So thank you very much, Francesco. I see there are several questions in the Q&A and in the chat, but luckily we have Lucas and Florian addressing them, Francesco's co-authors. So is there anything that has been left unanswered? It doesn't look like, but please do write or raise your hand. Or any other, Rick is raising his hand again.
Yeah.
Please, Rick.
So the real issue, I think, is for this collateral policy is that there is for the firms concerned is that brown firms, they have a risk that they're going to be caught with their pants down. So these brown firms have a risk that suddenly climate policy gets stepped up. You know, like the risk that Biden gets elected, or the risk that suddenly renewable technology gets invented, and then suddenly their stuff will get worthless. They may go default. So the default risk for brown firms may be perceived to be higher than for green firms. That would be one story. And then really, therefore, in a situation where governments are not doing their proper job, but there is not pricing carbon, but there is a risk of carbon being priced, or climate policy being stepped up, or a risk of a technological breakthrough green technology. That's the situation where central banks should be concerned with, and they should be addressing that by an appropriate differential collateral policy. But that's not quite your framework. I think you could adjust your framework to answer that question. But it's a kind of a different one to the one you've addressed, I believe.
I mean, I see your point. We're not modeling transition risk. We're not modeling. So we just want to see whether the preferential policy parameter is able to affect and to make markets internalizing basically a bit the externality. And this would be important also if we were modeling a bit more seriously the transition risk. So if you assume that already there is a difference of the bond price of green entrepreneurs and of conventional entrepreneurs, also in that situation, this preferential treatment would have an effect. So, but I'm not sure I understand your point.
Maybe I can add something on that. So the project started maybe with just the observation that central banks start implementing that policy. And from that starting point, we thought of evaluating that policy given that the central bank does the policy. So a framework where we would also model an endogenous increase in the risk of brown firms that is brought by the central bank is beyond the scope of that paper, but it's an interesting story. But we started the project by taking the central bank policy as given and start thinking about trade-offs and possible side effects of that policy. But yeah, that's an interesting point.
Right. So let me close it here because we're already 5 minutes above our closing time. Let me thank Francesco and co-authors once again for this interesting presentation. And let me remind everyone that if you're interested, there are planned events. So on March 22nd, there is another panel with researchers from Banco de Mexico and supervisors from Colombia and Chile about policy options for monetary and financial authorities in Latin America. We then have Jens van de Klooster on April 12th. We have Helen Ray on May 3rd and Warwick McKibben on June 14. These are the scheduled events for the moment, and you can sign up on the e-access forum website. With that, I would like to thank all of you once again, and see you next time.